All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory be unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakar Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone that rule well. Peace, salutations, and blessings be unto the hopeful elect, pushing his truth in sincerity throughout the four corners of the globe, in the sincere hopes of being delivered in these last days. All right, this is the brother Yakanan from the GMS England branch. And as you can see here on the screen, I have this news report taken from the Channel 4 News YouTube channel out here in the UK, and it's entitled US Market Slump Again as China Trade War Deepens. Okay, and for those of you that are tuned in to current events, you would know that a big thing in the news right now is this trade war, between mainly the US, Babylon the Great, and MOAB, China, okay? Which this is just a mere shadow of things to come, concerning the worsening of the relations between these elite leading, nations, okay? And this is all biblical prophecy, and it's all leading to the inevitable climax, of World War III, okay? And as Yahweh Shai told us, we are to watch, and pray, and that's exactly what we're doing. And that's why we pay close attention to subject matters of this nature, all right? Because it's very telling as to what time, we are currently living in, all right? And we're living in the time of the end of the kingdom of Esau Edom, okay? Now, this interview that I'm going to play, in a moment, features a Moabite by the name of Victor Gull, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I believe he's affiliated with the Center for China and Globalization, okay? And he's gonna mention some very, interesting things concerning, of course, Babylon the Great and China's stance towards what Babylon the Great, what Trump is actually doing concerning, these tariffs. All right. And it just shows you the mindset, of Moab. The scriptures talk about, the pride of Moab, all right, which we'll get. And this just shows you that prophecy, is coming to pass. Okay. And this thing is not going to end in an amicable way. All right. This is going to end in war. This is going to end in fuel of fire, like it mentions in Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 5. Okay. Now, without further delay, I'm going to play, a few brief segments of this video, and then Lord willing, we'll get a few scriptures to, accompany the, the things that have been said. All right.
Well, in a moment, I'll be speaking to a former Obama administration official and a Republican strategist. But first, Kathy spoke to Victor Gao earlier from the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing and the former translator for the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. She asked him first if he thought the US had successfully managed to isolate China.
I think the United States, in launching such a global trade war or tariff war, is doing the wrong thing. It has not only significantly eroded the living standards and the quality of life for the American people, it has caused the disruption in the stock market, in the bond market, and the complete disregard for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of so many countries in the world.
The problem is, though, that the rest of the world is now scrambling to do deals with the US. Some of those are quite close to being signed, according to America. So where does that leave China?
Well, if you hold a gun at the head of anyone, most people will panic and will be desperate and probably will do what you command or dictate for them to do. But whether they are willing to do that, whether they really respect your authority or control, that's another thing.
But the problem is that in this scenario, to use your metaphor, the US has the bigger gun, and so China ends up having more to lose from this trade war, doesn't it? You know, it can't sustain.
You heard what she said. You know, she said the US has a bigger gun. Okay, so basically they command more power and more influence. Okay, but that's not going to last for very long, because clearly, you know, as we see through the Spirit, you know, the Lord is taking away, you know, that influence and taking away that power and that stronghold that the United States of America actually has. All right, because they're being exposed in these last days. And the way they rule, you know, the scriptures talk about the hammer, you know, of the earth being broken, the way they rule, all right, and the way they treat the other nations, that's going to backfire, you know, at the end of the day. First saith Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. Okay, so these, you know, brute force tactics and way that they've been ruling and bullying the nations, that's going to backfire, all right? And that's biblical prophecy, okay? And we're going to see, you know, as time goes by, as we draw closer to the return of our Lord and Savior Yahweh Shai, you're going to see how all of these nations, all right, are going to turn against, you know, Babylon the Great. Okay, that's why the scriptures talk about, you know, shoot all your arrows at her. All right, them ICBM missiles that these nations have, they're going to ultimately end up, you know, firing those missiles at America, at Babylon the Great. Okay, and all of these nations are going to turn against that whore. Okay, so it's not going to end well for Babylon the Great. Okay, and you have, the nations have already, you know, in the spirit turned against, you know, America, Babylon the Great. Okay, now you have the BRICS nations, all right, what's that, Brazil, Russia, you know, India, China, and South Africa, okay? They're doing stuff. You know, they're making moves, you know, with their currency and making their, you know, alliances known to the world. So they're slowly phasing out, you know, Babylon the Great and phasing out, you know, the power of the dollar. But this is all going to end in World War III, okay? It's all going to end in World War III. This doesn't mean that, you know, MOAB is going to rule the earth. No, that's not going to happen. And we can prove that right quick. Let's go to the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 6. And let's get straight to the point in verse 9. All right? Now, this is 2nd Ezra, chapter 6. You know what? Let's start from verse 7. And it says, Then answered I and said, What shall be the parting asunder of the times? Or when shall be the end of the first and the beginning of it that followeth? And he said unto me, From Abraham unto Isaac, when Jacob and Esau were born of him, Jacob's hand held first the heel of Esau. And this is the point. For Esau is the end of the world. Okay? So what does that tell us? That tells us that during the time of the end of the world, which we are living in right now, Esau is going to be in rulership, okay? Beginning with their ruling class elites, they would be in power during the time of the end of the world. Now check the second part. So it says, for Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. Okay, so after the downfall of Esau, Edom, which we're about to witness in these last days, the next nation that is going to be ruling is the Israelites. Okay? Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. So when Yahweh Shai makes his return in these last days and takes down all of the authority of these kingdoms, all right, namely, you know, the kingdom of Esau, Edom, but also the other heathen nations, all right, that's why the scriptures tell us that he had many crowns upon his head, okay? He's going to set up his kingdom, all right, which is the kingdom of Yahweh Shai, which is the kingdom of the Israelites, okay? So there's going to be no, you know, Moab ruling the earth. You know, you actually have, I always go into this, you have books, you have a book, you know, out there, and many other books as well, that basically document, you know, how Moab is going to be the next ruling, you know, nation upon the earth, okay? Which is not going to happen, all right? First saith, you know, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. You know, Moab, you know, China is not going to rule the earth, all right? When you know and you're tuned into biblical prophecy, you know that that's not going to happen, all right? Now, those that ignore and don't know about, the scriptures and the interpretation of prophecy, you would naturally think, all right, that there's going to be another ruling nation such as, China or Russia, so on and so forth, because they're powerful nations after, Babylon the Great, falls. Which, again, it shows you that, hey, people know America's going down, man. All right, you can see, the signs are there. People know that America, has reached, that point of decline, and they're rapidly going down. And that's why the scriptures say, as lightning, Satan shall fall, roughly paraphrasing. Okay, as quick as lightning, Babylon the Great is going to go down. And we can see how that's going to happen, with what the Lord is doing in these last days concerning, all of the animosity and all of the friction that is between the nations, namely between, Russia, China, Babylon the Great, Iran, so on and so forth. Okay. Now let's go back to this video right quick.
The problem is that in this scenario, to use your metaphor, the US has the bigger gun, and so China...
authority or control, that's another thing.
But the problem is that in this scenario, to use your metaphor, the US has the bigger gun, and so China ends up having more to lose from this trade war, doesn't it? It can't sustain the loss of 15% of its export market, i.e. what you export to the US.
Not at all. China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world.
So they said, no, hey, and that's that pride of MOAB, all right? They actually believe that they can exist, in the world, without Babylon the Great, and they can, be the number one nation upon earth. And, that's why they mimic, Babylon the Great in so much of their wonders. Okay, that's why they're advancing, in, MOTB technology as well. That's why they have a social credit score system. Okay, they're implementing all of these things, man. Let me go back and hear that again.
Not at all. China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out from the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. And if the United States...
You heard what he said? He said, we don't care. We don't care. China has been around for the last 5,000 years. Okay? So, hey, that's the kind of spirit that Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, is igniting in the nations. Okay? Which, again, is going to lead to World War III, and it's going to lead to all of these nations plummeting Babylon the Great, all right, which is America, with ICBM missiles, man, okay? And this is a beautiful thing to actually watch, okay? Now, let's get a scripture right quick. This is Jeremiah. It's Jeremiah chapter 50, and we'll get straight to the point in verse 23. And it says, how is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? Okay. Now again, they're losing their influence. They're losing their dominance upon the earth. They're losing their respect and the fear that they once commanded amongst the nations. Okay. Day by day, the nations are becoming emboldened in their ways and their decisions. Again, I mentioned, the BRICS nations. Okay. So things are not looking good for Babylon the Great. Now it says, how is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? How is Babylon become a desolation among the nations? Okay. And it says in the NOT, Babylon, the mightiest hammer in all the earth, lies broken and shattered. Okay. Now that hasn't completely come to pass, but again, we're witnessing the beginning of that inevitable, process actually being, fulfilled upon the earth, where they're going to be completely broken. Okay. And they're going to be completely shattered and completely burned by them ICBM missiles. All right. But in the spirit, it's already happened. And it says, Babylon is desolate among the nations. I have laid a snare for thee And thou art also taken of Babylon, and thou wast not aware. Thou art found and also caught, because thou hast striven against the Lord. Okay, there they boasted themselves against Yahweh Hashem Yahushai, through their technology, through, changing times and laws, so on and so forth, like it mentions in the book of Daniel's, complete pride. And as it tells us in the book of Obadiah, due to their pride, they've been deceived. Okay, so they're going to be destroyed. All right, these Edomites, these beginning with the Rothschild family, the ruling elite banking families, they're going to be destroyed, man. Okay, Yahweh Hashem Yahushai is going to teach them a lesson, and he's going to use these other heathen nations to accomplish a big part of that. Okay, let me go back to this video, see if there was anything else I wanted to get.
Wants to bully China. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
I wonder how...
Hey, he said, we expect to survive for another 5,000 years. Now, from here, let's go to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 48. And let's get straight to the point in verse 29. And it reads, we have heard the pride of Moab. He is exceeding proud. His loftiness and his arrogancy and his pride and the haughtiness of his heart. I know his wrath, saith the Lord, but it shall not be so. His lies shall not so affect it. Okay? So again, upon seeing, what Victor, Gao, was saying, one of the first scriptures that came to mind, was the pride, of Moab. Okay, again, they are likening themselves, onto, Babylon the Great in their works, in the things that they're doing. And, they're trying to get this social credit score system, up and off the ground. A lot of the stuff that they're doing is mirroring, the desires of Esau Edom, with their technology system. Okay. So, and as he said, we expect to be here, for another 5,000 years. That's a very proud statement to make. Okay. Now concerning, the other nations, they're going to be, in the kingdom of heaven. However, they're going to be in servitude. All right. They're going to be in slavery. Okay. They're going to be under the Israelites, all right, you Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians, okay, they're going to be in chains, okay, you're not going to have dominance, in our kingdom, okay, you're going to be in subjection, you're going to be in servitude to, the Israelites, man, okay, all of you nations, all right, so I'm going to cut it off there, Lord willing, this has been edifying. And until the next time, I'll say shalom.